they've got nothing to defend against their own annihilation. And for us to say about the Arab peoples that they should do better, that they should be more united, that they should take up arms against their governments, I am going to name names, okay? I'm going to name Scott Ritter as a person who's talked this way. George Galloway is a person who has talked this way. And despite my indignation at the way they're talking now, I still continue to respect their overall political judgment and their commitment to anti-imperialism, but I'm furious with the kind of sentiments they're expressing. Are they taking up arms against their own government? First of all, most people in our society don't even have the decency to go out and protest, goddammit. Not even to do some ineffectual protest, politely organized, that doesn't cause disruption to anybody in power. And we are going to pass judgment upon them? You know, most people in our society, as far as I can tell, Kareem, don't give a goddamn about the Palestinian people. And if they do, they don't have the courage to speak out because, oh, they're going to call me an anti-Semite. They're going to call me a supporter of terrorism.
I also didn't want to see Assad go, but who am I to tell Palestinians to not to not congratulate the people in Syria when I don't have any idea what kind of nuances there are in the intergroup relationships between people over there whilst they are surviving a genocide? I find it from such a colonial arrogance. It's really baffling that people cannot see this.
It really is fundamentally racist. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
If you were talking about any other group, probably people would readily see that it's racist, but we get away with this kind of so-called analysis of the Arabs because we are accustomed to them having been dehumanized over our entire lifetimes by our governments and our corporate media.
I think a lot of people, including the Chinese, do not still really, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to push my colonial arrogance myself here, but I personally think that many people, including the Chinese, lack the psychopathic ruthlessness that is part of the imperial psychopaths, resulting in a misunderstanding of what is waiting for them, thinking that you can still normalize, thinking that you can still talk or negotiate your way out of it.
And that's precisely what we need to do in order to save ourselves at this stage. It's revolution. If they don't kill us in a nuclear holocaust, which is the first risk that we should all be gravely concerned about at this stage, given the behavior of our governments, then they'll come after us by plunging our societies into a state of outright fascism. Myself, why do I even ask?
I was just right now watching your conversation with Laith, and I must say it's all very heartbreaking that is happening. I find it extremely hard to digest.
It's a dark day, dark week, dark month, dark year, and hard to find light at the end of that tunnel.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's also why I wanted to talk to you a bit today, a bit about this bit of the background story behind everything that's happening right now. So let's just jump right into it. So I don't know if you have noticed, but I feel that well, where shall I start? This is all very, very difficult. I first want to start actually with something that you said a while back on our show, and I want to see how you feel about it right now. We are seeing the disintegration of West Asia in front of our eyes, and I personally think that that many of us may even have underestimated the absolute brutal power of Western, US-led Western imperialism. And my question is, I remember you saying, Dimitri, that you said, I think I will see the liberation of Palestine in my lifetime. I remember that, and that actually was a very hopeful statement. It gave me hope, and I actually believed you. I wonder, considering what is happening right now, how do you feel about that? Do you still see that do you still see it the same, or has something changed?
Let me say, perhaps it doesn't need saying that I don't have a crystal ball. no one can say with supreme confidence what will happen, not just to the Palestinians, but to any of us at this stage. But I remain, it wasn't even a hope. It was a strong conviction, a belief based upon an analysis of the evidence and the facts as I understand them. There are great gaps in our knowledge of what is actually happening. For example, why did Syria's government fall? What is the true state of the axis of resistance and so forth? So all I can do is make predictions based upon imperfect information, highly imperfect information. And I'm not a perfectly objective observer. None of us is. I try to be objective, but to some degree, of course, my subjective preferences enter into my calculus. I remain convinced that if I live to be a person of ordinary lifespan in a Western country, that I will see the liberation of Palestine in my lifetime. And the people of Palestine will at last realize their dream of self-determination. But I think that that is now likely to take longer than I had initially estimated. And I think the risk of their annihilation has gone up. But overall, my overall assessment has not changed. That within the space of the ordinary lifespan of somebody living in the West, I will see their liberation. I also think that in the interim, until they achieve that moment of freedom, the casualty count on the Palestinian side and the side of the Arab peoples generally is likely to be considerably higher as a result of what has happened in Syria. There's going to be even more death and destruction than I had anticipated or estimated on the road to Palestinian freedom.
Yeah, exactly. Very well said. And I think I can only agree with what you're saying here. It's very hard, I must say, to maintain hope in these dark times. But on the other hand, I also think we just don't have the luxury to give up hope, especially considering what is happening to the people in West Asia. And that also brings me to a discussion that I've seen online, and I'm really curious about your assessment of that. So there's one thing that imperialists are very good at, and that is to divide and conquer. They're really, really good at that. They're even good at that, doing it within their own borders, because if you look at the US or many European countries, people are all divided. Conservatives versus liberals, people who believe the imperialist narrative, people who don't believe the imperialist narrative. And right now, I've seen something, for example, in the online world, and I wonder if you've noticed that. I won't name names, but a lot of people will probably know who I'm talking about. Is that some very prominent Western anti-imperialists have made the statement that they gave up on the Arabs for what is happening right now in West Asia, which bothers me a lot, to be very honest, reading that kind of stuff. First of all, the Arabs, it's a half a billion people in the world, highly diverse. So it's very weird to give up on the Arabs, and it has to. And the reason these people gave were that it was in relation to support for the overthrow of Assad. Okay, and many Western anti-imperialists say Assad was terrible. Assad was necessary to maintain the resistance, and I think that they definitely have a point there. And I also was very, very disappointed seeing the overthrow of Assad, because I think it's extremely bad for the resistance. But on the other hand, I think as a Westerner, I do not have the right to say what other people should feel, also in West Asia. And if there are certain people in West Asia that celebrate the overthrow of Assad, that's up to them. And I think us saying as Westerners, okay, well, forget it, then I give up on the Arabs, I think reeks of an immense arrogance. Why am I saying this? Because it is not up to us to give up on the Arabs because apparently they don't deal with imperialism the right way. I think the responsibility is on us. I think we have failed stopping our democratically elected governments from throwing bombs on West Asia. So, how dare you, as a Western anti imperialist, saying, I gave up on the Arabs because their opinion or their reaction to what's happening in West Asia is wrong? It is our bombs, man. And that's so frustrating to me. And that's that colonial arrogance of not even being able to look at yourself and saying, wait a minute, do I have the right to actually have that opinion on Arab people? And also, by doing that, giving up on the Arab people, you actually help the imperialists by using your platforms to have the world, your viewers, give up on Arabs. Sorry for ranting a little bit long here, Dimitri. But I think what I'm trying to get at is also something that you said before, is that we have a responsibility and we need to step up our game. And apparently we are failing. What do you feel about this, Dimitri?
I I'm going to try not to be even more animated about this than you have been, Kareem. I am absolutely outraged, incensed, beside myself, apoplectic, pick your adjective, at those people in the West who are criticizing the quote unquote Arabs for either celebrating the downfall of Assad or failing to take up arms against their own governments and so forth. Let's just step back for a moment and look geopolitically at what has happened to the Arab world. The Arabs had the curse. It ought to have been a blessing, but it has turned out to be a horrible curse, a nightmare for them, that they are sitting in their native lands where they are indigenous on a mountain, a sea of oil, first of all. And secondly, many of them reside in a region that is of immense geopolitical uh, significance because it sits at the nexus of Africa, Asia, and Europe. And there are extraordinarily important and valuable trade routes throughout their lands. And as a result of this, powers that are bent on global hegemony, as Western governments have been throughout the post-World War II period, and even well before that, as we know, have devoted more destructive power to their societies, to their resistance, to their people, to their children, than any other region on God's green earth in the post-World War II period. If you think of the amount of munitions which have been built, delivered, dropped on their heads with our tax dollars, by our governments, it boggles the mind. You know, even as I mentioned in my conversation with Laith, even in Gaza alone, in the last 14 months, they have dropped more bombs than were dropped on Hamburg, Dresden, and London during the Second World War. And at least the peoples living in those cities were not trapped in them. The people of Gaza are trapped in them, and they have no defense. They don't have, like the English had or the Germans had, you know, the Luftwaffe or the Royal Air Force. They could send them up in order to provide some measure of protection to the civilian population. They've got nothing to defend against their own annihilation. And for us to say about the Arab peoples that they should do better, that they should be more united, that they should take up arms against their governments, I am going to name names, okay? I'm going to name Scott Ritter as a person who's talked this way. George Galloway is a person who has talked this way. And despite my indignation at the way they're talking now, I still continue to respect their overall political judgment and their commitment to anti-imperialism, but I'm furious with the kind of sentiments they're expressing. Are they taking up arms against their own government? You know, here in the West, we can actually say, we can have the conversation that we are having right now, without having, at least at this particular point, who knows what it's going to be like in a year or 2 years, a well-grounded fear of being tortured, of being imprisoned, of having our kids blown to bits before our very eyes. The people living in the Arab world don't have that luxury because of our governments. So who are we to judge their failure to expel the invader, their failure to unite around the cause of freedom? We have no business judging them. We are doing nothing. What have we done? What have we done? First of all, most people in our society don't even have the decency to go out and protest, God damn it. Not even to do some ineffectual protest, politely organized, that doesn't cause disruption to anybody in power. And we are going to pass judgment upon them. You know, most people in our society, as far as I can tell, Kareem, don't give a goddamn about the Palestinian people. And if they do, they don't have the courage to speak out because, oh, they're going to call me an anti-Semite. They're going to call me a supporter of terrorism. Maybe I'll lose my job. Hey, man, I appreciate that that's a concern to you. But you're going to pass judgment on the Palestinian people or the people of Syria or the people of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, who in their hearts bleed for the Palestinian people and the other peoples of the region who are being destroyed, but who have a well-grounded fear that they will be killed, that their families will be destroyed if they speak out, even if they just speak out. No, we have no basis to judge them at all. We have failed. This is primarily on us in the West. We have failed. We have the power to stop our governments from doing this. It's not an easy task, to be sure, but we've not even come close to meeting our responsibility to the peoples of this region and to all oppressed peoples, all the victims of Western imperialism. They're all over the world. The body count is shocking. The streets of cities around the globe are littered with the bodies of the victims of Western imperialism. What have we done to stop it?
Yeah, yeah, very well
Sickening.
said. Yeah, yeah, Dimitri, very well said. And it's very similar to what I wrote on my Bedbeat Substack. Actually, exactly what you say. It was so incredibly disappointing to see people such as Ritter or Galloway give up on the Arabs. And of course, a lot of people will say, yeah, well, shouldn't misinterpret it. They mean it from the best of intentions. Well, if you say it like that, it has an effect. And it's very easy for us in the West to give up on people who are literally living under the bombs of our governments, and we're doing nothing. So the way they deal with it and the kinds of if there are Palestinian factions that are congratulating the Syrians because they got rid of Assad, I also didn't want to see Assad go. But who am I to tell Palestinians to not congratulate the people in Syria when I don't have any idea what kind of nuances there are in the intergroup relationships between people over there whilst they are surviving a genocide? I find it of such a colonial arrogance. It's really baffling that people cannot see this. You know what I mean?
And also their reaction has not been monolithic, Kareem, right? It's like they say the Palestinians are celebrating the downfall of Assad. I know Palestinians who, although they weren't fans of Assad, are in complete agreement with you and I that this is a disaster. It's a disaster for the Palestinian project. It's a disaster above all for the Syrian Arab Republic, the dream of Arab nationalism, of Arab autonomy. They understand that perfectly well. So even within these communities, they're not monolithic by any stretch of the imagination, and they're talking about them as though they all think the same way. I mean, it's preposterous. It really is fundamentally racist. Let's be clear about this.
Yeah.
If you were talking about any other group, probably people would readily see that it's racist, but we get away with this kind of so-called analysis of the Arabs because
Yeah.
we are accustomed to them having been dehumanized over our entire lifetimes by our governments and our corporate media. And it's infecting people who are supposed to be on their side. That's the shocking thing about it.
Exactly, exactly. And as a half Algerian guy from the Netherlands, I saw that stuff already when I was young, and I noticed it, but nobody believed me. When I highlighted that kind of insidious anti-Arab racism that is there and that is often coming from people that are so convincingly on your side that once you critique that, once you say, hey, listen, this is not okay, people actually attack you. They attack you for saying something about that, and that happens now, of course, as well. And I think this is very important in the anti-imperialist sphere that we finally start to call out that crap, because it's really, really, really bad that we do that here in the West. Um, just that kind of we know better for everyone else, while we are a complete failure of stopping our so-called democratically elected governments from even ending diplomatic relations with Israel. I'm serious. Who has ended diplomatic relations with Israel? I think there is one, maybe in Latin America. I don't know which country that was, maybe Colombia or something. But as far as I know, there's one country that ended diplomatic relationships with Israel. I find it absolutely astonishing. One of the worst genocides we've ever seen, and nobody stops diplomatic relationships with Israel, including Russia and China. I mean,
Yes. Yeah. It's so much worse than I think even what we're really just scraping the surface of this hypocrisy. We actually, every single citizen living in the West profits from what is being done to the Arab world. Whether we realize it or not, whether we want it or not, we profit. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's imagine, as I'm sure you know, Karim, in the 1950s, there was a democratically elected president in Iran by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh. And the British and Americans overthrew this man. They admitted it after the fact. They declassified documents which showed conclusively that they overthrew him. And why did they do that? They did that because he wanted to nationalize the Anglo-American Oil Company, which was basically pillaging Iran's oil resources. He wanted, if he had done that, if he had succeeded, undoubtedly the oil, I think it's entirely reasonable to expect that the oil that Iran produced over the coming years under the Shah would have been priced in a manner that was more favorable to the Iranian people and would have been more expensive to the West. I'll give you another example, the Suez Canal. They have a brutal, sadistic dictator by the name of Sisi installed there after their one and only democratically elected president was overthrown, probably because he was just modestly sympathetic towards the Palestinian people. If that was actually a government that was maximizing the interests of the Egyptian people, probably the cost of transporting goods through the Suez Canal, goods to and from Europe, would be significantly higher. And there would be a transfer, a redistribution of wealth. If these were governments that prioritized the interests of their own people rather than their masters in Washington, the goods and services and commodities that we purchase from them would be priced in such a way that there would be a redistribution of wealth from the Western world to their societies, which there should be. There should be. We have impoverished them. We have profited every single day of our lives from the oppression of Arab peoples, which means that our obligation to defend their human rights is a profound one. It's not simply a case of us sitting back and failing to act. We are living off of their suffering, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, not just that, Dimitri. I mean, besides dehumanizing Arabs in West Asia and North Africa, we include their dehumanization within Western borders itself. I mean, the ways Arabs and Muslims have been treated in Europe and probably in Canada, that's very similar, is just appalling. We have complete governments in Europe, for example, in the Netherlands. We have complete governments that thrive on Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism. They have literally voted into power because they are saying the most horrendous things about Arabs and Muslims. I remember, I think it was Leith who said that there is hardly any other group in the world that has been so dehumanized by imperialism as Arabs. Of course, we had black African slavery, which is of course you could say an equal contender. But I hate to compare these things. It's all horrendous. But it's true. It's so normalized to just say the most gruesome things about Arabs to the extent that our societies care more about privileged Ivy League Zionist Jewish students' feelings than those who try to stop a genocide on Arabs. It's that intensely normalized, and I think we really have to reckon with ourselves in the West. Like, what have we done to these people, and are we what are we still doing to people in West Asia, North Africa, to the Arab world, Muslims? And that
Mhm.
that that brings me to another question I have for you, Dimitri, in that sense. And by the way, I wanted to say to everybody who wants to know the intricacies behind imperialism, there's also something we need to discuss more. I can advise everyone to see our latest interview with Professor Michael Hudson, who tries to, very in simple terms, tries to explain to us how it is possible that the U.S. empire is able to have that continuous stream of money to bankroll imperialism in every corner of the world. I think that discussion also we need to have that, because it's abnormal that a 300 or 330 million people strong country is literally controlling an almost 8 billion population of the world by sowing death and destruction literally in every corner of the world. That's an endless stream of money. We need to have that discussion Like how can we stop this? And that also brings me to China and Russia. I think they are way too passive, and I think they do not realize the brutal expansionism of imperialism. And they're already at the door of China now. They have these Uyghurs in Syria. They're training them. They are getting closer to Iran. They are pacifying Russia in Ukraine. I think the Chinese do not realize what's coming for them if they don't step up their game. What do you think, Dimitri?
Their passivity continues to amaze me, Kareem, just as you are dumbfounded by it, so am I. I mean, I saw in a report today that the Uyghur terrorists who have helped HTS to seize Damascus are openly declaring their intention to return to China and to wage jihad. But this is entirely foreseeable. What did the Chinese government think was going to happen? You know, the Iranian regime is clearly next, and China is the biggest importer of oil from the Islamic Republic. Uh, if they seize control of Iran by overthrowing its current government and installing one that is going to be effectively a vassal of Washington, then the Axis resistance is, for all intents and purposes, it won't be completely dead, but the project of liberation of the Arab peoples is going to take far longer, and there'll be far more suffering in the interim. But if they do that, this is going to be profoundly contrary to the interests of China, which is extremely dependent upon oil and gas from West Asia. So I don't know what they're thinking here, Karim. Hopefully, this upheaval in Syria is causing them to reflect carefully on their passivity and their restraint. Now, I'm not suggesting that they go to war, but why aren't they imposing sanctions? They themselves are being subjected to sanctions. You know, I recently had the opportunity to interview the Russian ambassador to Canada. It was a gentleman. It was a very enlightening conversation. On the whole, I don't agree with the narrative about the Russian Federation we hear in the West, and I've been very clear about that. But I asked him, why isn't the Russian Federation imposing sanctions upon Israel? And he said to me, well, the position of the Russian Federation, first of all, we don't arm the Israelis. That's something. I said, do you have a formal arms embargo? He said, no, but as a practical matter, we don't arm them. But we believe that sanctions without United Nations Security Council approval are a violation of the UN Charter. Well, I agree with him. In principle, that's true. But there's also something called the Genocide Convention. And under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention, to which the Russian Federation is a signatory, all states have an obligation to prevent genocide. So that surely means that in an appropriate case, you are exempted from the prohibition on imposing sanctions under the UN Charter and can impose sanctions on someone who's in the process of committing a genocide. So as a legal matter, I think the Russian Federation is wrong, but also as a practical matter, how is this principled stand taken by the Russian Federation shielded it from unilateral sanctions? The West doesn't give a damn about the UN Charter. They have subjected the Russian Federation to one round of sanctions after another. So the Russian Federation is entirely within its rights and in fact has an obligation, as does China, as do all states, particularly those that are signatories to the Genocide Convention, to impose crushing sanctions upon the genocidal regime in Israel. That's their duty. It's not just a moral duty. It's a legal duty. And if they fail to do that, it's not going to protect them. Who are they kidding? Do you think Trump is going to give a damn about imposing devastating tariffs on Chinese corporations because of the UN Charter? He doesn't care. He doesn't care. He won't even think twice about it. He's going to use it like toilet paper. We all know that. So let's get real here. Okay, it's time for them to take, they don't want to go to war. I understand that. It could become a nuclear holocaust when nuclear powers are involved. But they have economic tools at their disposal, which they are not using. And that is a strategic error, in my opinion. Not only that, but it's immoral.
Yeah, I think what many of us around the world, including the Chinese, I live here in China, and I think China has a wonderful upcoming, or not even upcoming. It's just a wonderful society, and I think an upcoming global power civilization. I think China. I really think this is the future, and I think the world would be a good place if most countries most people would live like many of us here in China do. And I think a lot of people, including the Chinese, do not still really, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to push my colonial arrogance myself here, but I personally think that many people, including the Chinese, lack the psychopathic ruthlessness that is part of the imperial psychopaths, resulting in a misunderstanding of what is waiting for them, thinking that you can still normalize, thinking that you can still talk or negotiate your way out of it. Just like, for example, Kevork said to me during a talk about the new ruler of Iran, Pezeshkian. The idea that you can still normalize your way out of imperial violence and domination, even though they're just expanding and expanding. And to be honest, I literally see the world disintegrating in front of my eyes. I find this very scary. I literally see that we're all being thrown back into the dark ages, and it's getting closer and closer. We all failed to stop it during Vietnam. Then if Afghanistan came, we failed. Iraq came, we failed. Libya came, we failed. Syria came, we failed. Now we have Palestine, of course, all the time. We failed. And it's getting closer and closer. It's now in Ukraine. Georgia is becoming a mess. Korea is becoming a mess. Syria is, of course, a total mess. You think they're gonna stop? It's getting closer and closer. And you have the terroristic violence already on European soil in Ukraine. That's going to expand. Don't think it'll stop. You have it now coming closer and closer in East Asia with the whole Korea situation. And it's now you have the Uyghurs, of course, that are trained. Some of the Uyghurs, not all the Uyghurs, some of the Uyghurs that are trained by the US. I think people do not realize how how do you say that in English? How brittle our safety, our normal way of life is. It can literally disintegrate before our eyes. And before you know, we're back in the dark ages, and children that are born right now already don't know a world differently than this. So you also have generations that get born that think this is normal. So it's not like, oh, people will still miss the times that everything. No, just like kids now don't they even know what it is like if that we didn't have internet. Kids right now also don't know what it is like to have a world, at least for a large part, that is not as brutal and violent as something that is probably coming right now. And I find I and yeah, sometimes it feels like we're shouting but nobody hears us. And that is, of course, also because we are not only dominated by a powerful empire militarily and economically, but also just media. The media just keeps everybody blind and passive, whilst the world is completely disintegrating in front of our eyes. And I'm not gonna lie, Dimitri, I'm very scared. I'm very scared about what's going to come, and I wonder what we can do right now. Like what how can we step up our game? What should we do?
Before I address that question, it's a very important question. I just want to comment on something you said. It's so important. We started by talking about how Russia and China might be making a grave error by being relatively passive in the face of these murderous actions by Western governments. But it really is not just Russia and China. It's us. We are at risk. We are in grave danger. I try to avoid, Karim, wherever possible, trying to appeal to my contemporaries' self-interest to get them to act in a way that is just minimally human decency. Okay, ultimately, we should stop this because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But if that doesn't motivate you, and I'm not saying this in order to inveigle you into taking action, I truly believe this to be the case. They're coming for you next. All of us are at risk. Our democracies, as you said, you talked about fragility. We don't, first of all, we've never had real democracy in the West. We've had what I've called quasi-democracy. We've had elements of democracy, like fairly robust protections for free speech. Those are being rapidly eroded. We've had civil liberties, some level of due process. That is being rapidly eroded. We've seen increasing levels of police brutality. administered to people. Even you've seen the most amazing things, Jewish academics being beat up by the cops on university campuses in the United States because they were protesting against a genocide. Who would have thought we would see such a thing in our lifetimes? Our freedom, our well-being, our security is hanging by a thread, and the primary threat to it is our own governments. If they get away with this, Karim, the most publicized genocide in the history of humanity, when has a crime of this nature ever been done so audaciously and openly in the history of humanity? I'm not aware of anything that compares to it. There have, of course, been far more deadly acts of genocide and other atrocities where the body count was much higher, at least at this particular point in this genocide. It's going to continue to grow rapidly if we allow it to continue. That is true, but the audacity of it, the brazenness of it is unprecedented. And what conclusion will they draw if we allow them to get away with this? They will think that we are prepared to accept anything. Nothing can rouse us to revolution. And that's precisely what we need to do in order to save ourselves at this stage. It's revolution. If they don't kill us in a nuclear holocaust, which is the first risk that we should all be gravely concerned about at this stage, given the behavior of our governments, then they'll come after us by plunging our societies into a state of outright fascism. That's where we're heading. So if you don't care about the Palestinians, if you don't care about the Arabs, think about your own children. Think about yourself, because you are at risk. Now, what can people do? Well, first and foremost, we need to impose a cost on the wrongdoers. The cost of their depravity has to be higher than the cost of their compliance with human rights and international law. Unless these people don't care about appeals to decency, you can sit there and condemn them until the cows come home. You can call Joe Biden Genocide Joe until you're blue in the face. That's not going to change his behavior. Call Justin Trudeau Genocide Justin. If it makes you feel better, man, hey, go ahead and do it. But you think that's going to actually alter his behavior? After these 14 months, have any Western governments actually taken meaningful action against Israel with all of the condemnations, all of the harsh rhetoric which we have rightfully directed at them? Nothing. It's not accomplished a damn thing. These people only understand their self-interest. So first and foremost, I think we have to impose an economic cost on the corporations and the billionaires who are fueling this genocide and these wars in West Asia. BDS is an obvious way you can do that. And it also happens to be, if you're not publicly advocating for BDS, it is essentially a risk-free way of helping the Palestinian people, because they're not able to identify through your purchasing choices that you have made a conscious decision. If you're just privately doing it, they're not able to identify you as somebody who is using your knowledge of who is complicit in the suffering of Palestinians to influence your purchasing decisions. So it's a risk-free way of helping the Palestinian people. But you have to be, diligent about it. You have to go out and you have to inform yourself what corporations are complicit, and the BDS National Committee has provided to us a helpful website which keeps us informed. And then you have to understand what products and services are they selling. Sometimes their names aren't on the products and services. So you have to go out, you have to educate yourself, and you have to be diligent about not buying their products and services. And if you're not prepared to publicly promote the BDS movement, at least have the decency to tell people in your private circle, people you trust, family, friends. These are the corporations that you need to stop buying from. We are not anywhere close to the critical mass we require to make BDS effective. We have not yet imposed a cost that is high enough on these corporate entities. There have been some notable examples, but in general, we have not come nearly close to the level of collective action we need in order to impose these costs on the complicit corporate entities and gazillionaires out there. The second thing is, we need to actually cause disruption to the activities and the operations of these corporations. And we've seen some very admirable examples of this, for example, in the United Kingdom, where there have been repeated actions on the part of Palestinian solidarity activists to shut down or disrupt the operations of the Elbit Systems manufacturing facility in the United Kingdom. We've seen attempts, some of them successful, in the Mediterranean major ports to stop tankers that were believed to be delivering fuel to the genocidal regime. These types of things need to be scaled up massively, but be clear about this. If you engage in that form of resistance, you are at risk. That's just unavoidable. They may arrest you. They may charge you criminally. You can try in a court of law to raise some sort of defense based upon, principles of conscience. But at the end of the day, you may go to jail. And I say to you as a citizen, this is a risk we now must take, not just for the benefit of the peoples of the Arab world, for our own security, our own safety. We must take on these risks. And if we're prepared to sit there and to say to people living in the Arab world, you should take up arms and overthrow your own US-backed dictator, how can we not, in good conscience, take on the risk of being charged criminally for disrupting the business operations of a corporation that is fueling the genocide? And finally, and these are just some ideas, Karim. People need to be creative. They need to think, how can we impose costs on the wrongdoers such that their calculus will be changed and they will no longer regard it to be in their self-interest to behave in this way. Okay, I'm just giving you some examples. But a third way, and there's something that I've done repeatedly, is I go into events where leading politicians, the most powerful politicians, for example, there was an event in Montreal last year where Antony Blinken was being feted by the Canadian Foreign Minister, Melanie Joly. And I got together a group of activists and we went there and disrupted the event. And we told him to his face he was a war criminal. There were people who went out and they found out where the Canadian Foreign Minister lives. And they actually camped out in front of her home and protested against her complicity in the genocide. It was really eye-popping to see the reaction of the Canadian political elite to that one incident. They went ballistic because they're thinking, my God, this actually disrupts my peace of mind. This is how do I explain to my children there are people outside my door calling me a supporter of murderers, saying that I have the blood of Palestinian children on my hand. Okay, that's a very unpleasant experience. Nobody wants to go through that, even them. Okay, yeah. But you've got to step up your game and do this. Will you possibly be arrested and charged? Is it possible that some fascist thug cop is going to beat you up? Oh yeah, it's entirely possible. But we have an obligation to take these risks, not just for the Palestinian people, but for our own children. We have to take on these risks. So I really can't stress this enough to all the peoples out there. And I've been approached, I can't tell you how many times, Karim, in the past year and a half by young professionals who are working on Canada's equivalent of Wall Street, which is Bay Street in Toronto. They're working at large law firms, large accounting firms. They're working in banks, and they come to me privately again and again and again. And they say, I don't know how you speak out. I really want to say something, but I can't. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be demoted. They're going to give me a pay cut. I have great sympathy, especially for young people in that situation. I really do. And I'm not in that situation. I'm at the tail end of my career. And if I don't earn another dime, for the rest of my life, I'll be okay. My family's going to be okay. So I'm not pretending to be, to diminish the economic risks that young professionals confront when they speak out in defense of Palestine and against Western imperialism. But again, I say to you, it's your obligation to do so nonetheless. And if you don't do it, especially those who are relatively well off in our society, relatively well educated, we're finished. What remains of democracy in the West, and it isn't much, will be gone. It'll evaporate within our lifetimes, and we'll be living in truly fascist states. That's where we're heading.
Yep, totally agree with you. And I think everybody who has people they love, children, sister, cousins, friends, I think you have a responsibility to do something, because this is our future on the line. Let alone the suffering, the intense suffering of the people in West Asia and other parts of the world under the boot of imperialism. Like you said, that should be our first driver. But even if people do not care about that, and there are a lot of them in our parts of the world, then think about your own people you love. Because believe me, what's happening in Palestine is not going to stay within those borders. If you think they can do it to little children over there, and I mean, everybody has seen the images. These children are identical to our own children. They're going to do it to you. Seriously, they're going to do it to you. They do not give a flying F. And why do they not give a flying F about their own people? Look at the prison industrial complex. Look at what they do. You think they care about you? You know what I mean? And I think you made a very good point there. You said these politicians, once you disrupt their lives and actually their children start to see things. For example, when you're protesting them as genociders and everything, This is such a good point because most of these politicians live in a very closed off bubble where they just don't feel it. Yeah, they see on the television some people waving flags and blowing whistles. They just don't care. They really don't care. And once it disrupts their personal life, because all these narcissists are big fat egotistic people, so once you disrupt their personal lives, then it suddenly starts to hurt them. And I think you make a very good point because I remember these young people also camping outside of Blinken's house, and every day throwing like blood on the road when he exits with his car and his children. I think that stuff, even though Blinken is just a robot, but I think that stuff really works. And I think that should happen much more. But it also brings me to another question, and I think we as people who are against imperialism have never really, like I said, we there are so many crucial aspects we don't dissect on the anti-imperialist side. We discuss the most obvious things such as assassinations, militarism, the funding of extremist groups. All these things are very visible, but we lacked the deeper discussion about the things that really keep this empire running. And like for example, one of the examples is, like I said, is our recent discussion with Professor Michael Hudson about how is it that the dollar dominance makes this empire, makes the U.S. imperialism able to just use endless streams of money to fund this. Okay, this is one of the crucial discussions. But there's another crucial discussion that is lacking. I hardly ever see that on anti-imperialist channels and newspapers and everything, or online newspapers, I should say. And that is the question: who runs empire? I'm serious. Who is running? Why do we not highlight the faces, the names of the people who run? Okay, we're all saying Biden this, Biden that, Trump this. Guys, seriously, it doesn't matter if it's Trump or a bloody robot. The empire will go on. He's a figurehead. He's just a face, and not only he's a face. He's the distraction. He's where you can vent your anger at. But who is running empire? Who are the faces behind empire? That's like, tell me, any of you, all the big banks. Do you know who are running the big banks? What's their name? What's their faces? What's the board of trustees? What is whatever you call that? Who have stocks in these big banks? How does it work? Like, who are the faces that are killing people around the world? Do we
Yeah.
know? Do we know? Do we highlight them?
Your words are music to my ears, Karim. I could not agree more. I don't think we should, ultimately, these are the people who do control Western government policy, but they do have power. If they choose to exercise it, people like Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau and Olaf Scholz and Keir Starmer, if they choose to exercise it, they will pay a price, a personal price, if they do that. Those people who ultimately have economic control will make them suffer for their disobedience, but they could do it if they were prepared to take the price. But you're absolutely correct that we have to expand the pressure to the people who are ultimately standing behind the faces of power. I think is an excellent question. Do you know, like you said, who's the CEO of Raytheon? How many people could answer that question? How many people could answer the question, who's the CEO of Boeing? Who's the CEO of Elbit Systems? Who's the CEO of Rafael, the fighter manufacturer? These are questions which are easily answerable. A minimum of due diligence will enable you to do that. And if you join with others in devising ways to make their lives uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable, seek them out. I'm not suggesting upon anybody that they take, matters into their own hands by means of violence, like this person, this accused individual. I believe his name is Luigi Mangione, who is accused of having shot the CEO of United Healthcare. I'm not urging anybody to do that. You don't have to do that in order to have an impact upon these people. You can do things that are nonviolent, but which nonetheless, in the society in which we live, is going to expose you to some level of legal risk. And it's a level of legal risk that I think is one that we regrettably have to be prepared to assume in order to have an impact. We're not having an impact. Those are the people we need to focus upon, 100%. At the end of the day, I'm here to tell you, because I get asked this question all the time by people, because I'm a lawyer. You know, what are the risks to me if I do X? What are the risks to me if I do Y? And they want me to tell them, I know, that there is a risk-free way to put a stop to the depravity and to set our world on a sustainable course, a course that complies with the minimum dictates of human conscience and decency. But there is no risk-free way, with the possible exception, as I said, if you just privately make consumption choices, you know, and you avoid buying products and services, which is something. I urge you to do that at a bare minimum, you know. But at the end of the day, if you really want to have an impact, you're going to have to expose yourself to some level of risk.
Yeah, exactly. And I think exactly like you say, within the bounds of the law, you can, of course, make people's life uncomfortable. And um,
I
and
want to
these
give you an
people,
example, by the way. I want to be concrete, just as an illustrative example of what you should be doing in that regard. Okay. Back in 2018, because I see people that sort of the lone wolves of disruption, I call them, who they're well-intentioned people, right? They see an opportunity. There's somebody, they run into somebody in public,
yeah,
some prime minister or some minister having dinner, and they go up to them and they interrupt them. They disrupt their peace of mind and they accuse them rightly of being complicit in a genocide. I have utmost admiration for people who do that. It takes courage to do that, you know? So, and I don't want to diminish that. But if you want to really be effective, you have to be more organized than this. And I'm going to give you an example. Back in 2018, an Israeli sniper during the Great March of Return shot a Canadian-Palestinian doctor who actually is a friend of mine by the name of Tariq Lubani. He was in Gaza and he was tending to wounded civilians who were being gunned down by Israeli snipers in the Great March of Return. This entirely peaceful attempt by Palestinian refugees in the Gaza Strip to exercise their internationally legally recognized right to return to their homeland. Okay. So he gets shot. What does the Canadian government of Justin Trudeau do? 2 weeks later, it enters into an enhanced free trade agreement with Israel. Doesn't even delay the signature of this enhanced free trade agreement, which is much more beneficial to Israel than it is to Canada, because Canada has a much bigger economy. It's a much bigger market than Israel's market. Okay. He did nothing. And they invite the economy minister of Israel to Toronto, the Canadian government does, who then became, by the way, the foreign minister of Israel, to be feted by the industry minister of the Trudeau government, a fellow by the name of Francois Philippe Champagne, in Toronto at a ritzy hotel. So we learned of this. I and a bunch of other activists, and the price of entry, there was a sumptuous meal available to the people who came, was about $150 a head. So we raised money and we got 6 volunteers to go in there, of whom I was one. When we went in there, we had a plan. And the plan was that each of us would take their turn disrupting the economy minister of Israel during his speech. And we had a predetermined order, and we did it at 10-minute intervals. Okay. So basically we ruined the entire lunch, and we had a six person who was in there, whose sole function was to record the entire event. Because if you really want to maximize the embarrassment to these, unconscionable criminals, then you have to publicize it after the fact. I mean, if you really want to have an impact on them psychologically and their families and so forth, you have to publicize the fact that they've been denounced for their complicity in these crimes. And so that took considerable organization, but it was a very, very successful disruption. Now, if you rely upon the same small group of people to do these things over and over again, they're not going to have a difficult time putting a stop to it. I can't get anywhere close to the prime minister anymore. I have disrupted Prime Minister Justin Trudeau so many times at public events in Montreal that now his security detail have standing instructions. They know what I look like. I think they actually study my photos. It's not just me, by the way. There's a handful of other activists in Montreal, like Yves Engler. We're in the same boat, all of us. We can't get anywhere close to a minister, not just the prime minister, a minister in the Trudeau government, whenever they come to Montreal, and they come frequently. So we need help. People need to come together, identify where they're going to be speaking in public, not just the politicians, as you said, but also these corporate executives, these corporate bigwigs who live in relative anonymity, organize a way of uh, causing their complicity to be brought to the public's attention to the maximum possible degree and cause them discomfort as much as possible. At least let's do that much, people. We need help. We can't all be the same, 100 or 200 people in Canada doing that or whatever country, people are organizing in. We need everybody to step up to the plate. If we did this en masse, it doesn't have to be the whole population. If you had even 5 or 10% of the population engaging in these sorts of actions in a disciplined, organized way, and sustaining it for a considerable period of time, we could affect their behavior. It has to be more than sporadic.
Yeah, well said, well said. And what you're saying, an organization, instead of giving up on the Arabs, we need to organize more in our part of the world. Absolutely. And what you were saying was very coincidentally, I was actually thinking about the same examples. The people who are interrupting speeches and then dinners of all these powerful people. I've seen that the ones that are always so successful is where you have people around the hall, sitting all around the hall, different areas of the hall, and then every time somebody pops up, you have like the security guards taking them away, and pop, there's another one, and pop, there's another one,
Absolutely.
and it's
Yeah.
so
Oh, check out,
successful.
that wonderful organization of Medea Benjamin, Code Pink.
Code Pink,
They
yeah.
they're masters of this kind of just. It's like a work of art watching them perform. If we were doing that on a large scale consistently, wow,
Yep.
we could
Yep.
have a really.
And I think we lost that in the West organization. I mean, we all grew up in that free market, neoliberal, individualistic kind of culture where the social bonds have completely been eroded, consumerism and individualism, and that was a organized plan. I always say that as a social psychologist who focused a lot on neoliberalism and capitalism, that was organized the way that has eroded social bonds in the West and the rest of the world, by the way. And you see it now. We are unable to organize. And with a media system that is so good at severing bonds between people, um, it's even more difficult. And you see it now. I mean, in the online world. I mean, whilst every day Palestinian children are dying, people are fighting online about their opinions on Assad and their opinions on this and their opinions on that. And whilst that is these online quarrels are going on, Palestinians are being slaughtered, raped, tortured, murdered, and before you know, the Palestinians, at least over there, don't exist anymore. And I just still cannot believe it. I just still cannot believe what these people are getting away with. I mean, I've seen the pictures of Rafah before and after. I mean, you just can't believe it. Complete hundreds, or maybe even I could say thousands of years of history. That little alleyway where you met your first love, the place where your great grandfather for the first time settled as not as a settler, of course, but built his home as a Palestinian, for example. Like all these little memories,
Diversity, the archives, think about those. That's all been destroyed.
everything.
It's unbelievable. I share your astonishment, Karim. There isn't a day goes by where I ask myself, this is this a nightmare that we're living through? Is this actually happening? I never thought I'd live just to see such depravity on open display. And my
Yep.
government doing it. Ultimately, let's be honest here, Israel is a geopolitical pipsqueak. There is no way in hell that Israel could do what it is doing without the full backing of Western governments. We ultimately, our governments are the perpetrators of this genocide. Israel is simply the instrument through which this genocide is being committed. Without the cooperation and support of our governments, it's over for Israel. Over. Like that. So the onus lies upon us to stop it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think on that note, we can end it here. Usually I want to end on a positive note, but not this time. We are just not in in that stage of of imperialism, I could say. And like you said,
Well,
we have to.
yeah, I do want to say something about that, Karim. You know, I have this kind of conversation with people in my family, you know, but they want to talk. Sometimes they don't want to talk about it because it is very uh, distressing and dark to have to address what is happening in the world. Okay. One reaction you can have to all of this is despondency. And that is a very natural reaction. And one, sadly, which I think most people have when they see this, and
Yep.
it's entirely understandable. But there's another reaction you can have. And the other reaction is indignation. You know, you can channel this so that it arouses the fire in your belly and you say, no more. No more. I'm not going to put up with it anymore. There are moments of despondency that I go through. I must confess that every day when I see what's
Yep.
happening to the children in Gaza. But the predominant reaction that I have, I guess, I don't know, I've become disciplined about this. I don't know exactly how or why, but is one of anger, righteous anger, which fuels me to act. So I would, suggest to those of us who are listening, you have a choice. You can react by throwing up your arms and saying, I can't handle this horror. It's, it's destroying whatever appreciation of life I have left. Or you can say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore, and I'll do everything I can as a citizen of conscience to contribute to a solution. The choice is yours, and we can prevail in the end. I'm not simply saying that to be, Pollyannish. This is my strong belief and conviction that we can prevail in the end.
Well said, Dimitri. And totally agree. We have to step up our game. We can ask the places where we work, what do they invest in? We can go to the supermarket and refuse to buy anything from occupied Palestine. And even if everybody in this who would watch this video, let's say a couple of thousand people, would do that, let's say per person, that's $10. Then you have already tens of thousands of dollars in profit that would be
Right.
gone for these people.
And
Imagine
if they tell
if
a few of
larger
their
numbers
friends,
would do this.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You can make a meaningful contribution if you simply apply yourself. Devote yourself. Like, how many people are even putting in 2 hours, 3 hours a week to stop the bloodshed in Gaza? How many people are doing that much? You can't spare 2 to 3 hours a week? You kidding me?
Mhm.
How many hours do you spend watching television? How many hours do you spend listening to pop music on the radio? Why don't you just take a little bit out of that time and devote it to putting a stop to this horror show? If we do that in sufficient numbers, and it doesn't even have to be a majority of the population, we can have a sea change in our government's policies.
Absolutely, Dimitri. So on that note, I guess we can end it here. And man, thank you so much. Always following you. So everybody who's watching, go to Dimitri Lascaris' channel. Reason to Resist is his program. Also Substack, right, Dimitri?
Yes, and on X at Dimitri Lascaris. And frankly, Karim, it was cathartic for me to listen to you speak because I don't hear enough people speak that way. I really appreciate your passion. Thank you.
Okay, well, same here. Exactly the same. I'm always love listening to you and your shows. You're one of the few people that I can honestly say that has a good heart. And in the anti-imperialist world, you can just sometimes with people you can feel it, and you are one of those very few people where I can feel that. And I think we need that more in this world. And all your actions are super important. And all of our viewers, if you've never been there, go to Dimitri's channel and follow him because you do really important work. So on that note, I'm definitely gonna invite you again in the near future, Dimitri. I hope you allow me to bother you again.
My pleasure.
And
Thank you for having me on.
and keep going.
You too. Take
All
care.
right. Bye.
Bye-bye.